to the first ever AppNexus Publisher Summit here in San Francisco. Thank you to our band, Lucky Chops, from New York, here from South by, where they were amazing. Hope they got you nice and warmed up for a great day today. Now, I have a small thing to discuss with you today before we get the program started, and that's this internet thing. I believe it is in dire need of saving. Now, for those of you who have not followed the incredible growth of the internet over the past, say, 20 years, I believe it really comes down to a very simple thing, a virtuous cycle. And if you look at this virtuous cycle, it works kind of like this. You've got publishers of many sorts who produce content. Now, that content is viewed by consumers. Advertisers, marketers want to connect with those consumers. The consumers give their attention to the marketers, and the marketers pay the publishers. This works really quite well. Everyone wins. More content, more advertising, more money, and the internet flourishes. And for those of you who are thinking, well, what about subscriptions? What about e-commerce? What about all the other ways that we've found the internet to be monetized? The truth is, advertising is still the largest revenue driver for the biggest internet companies. Companies like Google, Facebook, even Alibaba, which while we think of it as an e-commerce company, all of its money really comes from advertising. And so, I believe if we want to keep the internet growing, we need to do something very simple. We need to fuel this virtuous cycle. So imagine, just for a moment, that we could quadruple the CPMs for every major publisher, whether app or web, whatever kind, gaming, news. Imagine all CPMs across the internet were to quadruple tomorrow. What do you think would happen? How many of you publishers in the audience would, I don't know, produce more content? Anybody? Show of hands. Would you hire more game developers, hire more journalists? Anybody? A couple people. Anybody not think that would fuel more content production? Any skeptics in the audience? Not a lot. How about this? Do you think that if we quadrupled CPMs, you might cut back on ad load? You might show fewer ads to improve user experience. Any takers? Quite a few. All right. So I think that proves the point. If we could improve monetization, we'd see publishers produce more content, and I think we address some of the fundamental challenges that consumers have with latency, with user experience. But what happens when this doesn't work? Imagine things go the opposite direction. What would happen if CPMs were to drop? Well, the first thing, I believe, is the same people that said they would produce more content might produce less content. Or maybe they don't want to lay off their game developers or, get rid of some productive journalists. What they do is they add more ads to the page. They layer on more ad technology. They make it more money from the same content and the same audience. Now, what do advertisers do? They say, hang on a second, all those below the fold ads, I get the joke. All you're doing is trying to find new ways to screw me out of my needed attention from my audience. I'm going to layer on more technology. How about a technology arms race? DSPs, SSPs, DMPs, verification, measurement, throw everything we've done in the past 6 or 7 years in ad tech together, and what you really have is a fundamental conflict between buyers and sellers over how to squeeze the most possible money out of this ecosystem without addressing the fundamental problems. What do consumers do? They block ads. Not just because of the ads, but because of all of this detritus on the page, because of all of the things that are stopping them from getting to content. And the truth is, as a consumer myself, I was on the airplane out here yesterday, and I was trying to look at a page, and all of a sudden this ad, I can tell it's an ad because I look at the little thing at the bottom that says, what's hanging my page. An ad is keeping me from getting to my content. And just for a moment, I thought, I should really install an ad blocker. Did not install an ad blocker. But you can see why it's so tempting for consumers, because they want to see this content. They don't want to look at ads, but they don't mind the ads as long as they're not in the way. But this vicious cycle we create here, or at least the end of this virtuous cycle, is causing a huge impact to the internet as we know it. We're no longer seeing this enormous exponential growth we've seen for the past 20 years. And in fact, we're not seeing what I think we all expected, which was a massive spin shift from marketers away from TV and into digital. It is happening, but it's not happening as fast or in the ways that I think would benefit all of us. So we really have to solve these fundamental problems if we want to return the internet and all of our businesses to the kind of growth and trajectory that we expect. So we really have to solve three fundamental problems. They're the three I mentioned. First, we have to solve user experience for consumers. I think some interruption or some annoying ads are okay. The whole point is to get the consumer's attention, but we can't get between them and their content, or we'll destroy their internet experience and they will block ads. Secondly, we have to figure out how to restore marketer trust that digital, in general, is a channel that gives them the results that they expect. And third, we have to provide the monetization to publishers that allows them to hire journalists and game developers and all the other pieces of a healthy publisher ecosystem. There are too many examples right now of major journalists, publishers, newspapers, going out of business or losing tons of money. We see this in the gaming industry. We see this across the entire internet. This is a very serious problem. So I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking, Facebook is going to solve this problem, right? Well, there's Mr. Zuckerberg having a little jog, as he does. And, I think we can all argue that Facebook has done a brilliant job of solving this problem, as long as you're on Facebook. So Facebook controls the user experience. You can call it a great walled garden, if you will. So there's no user experience problem. Marketers get great results because they can access consumer data. It's all completely contained. What we're missing here is the publisher. There's no real concept of an independent publisher in the Facebook environment. Now, I understand that they have FAN, the Facebook Audience Network. They've invested a bit in things like LiveRail. There are some attempts to try to pull publishers into this environment. But the real idea that Facebook has is instant audiences. Wouldn't it be nice if publishers would just generate content, pay all of these expensive journalists and developers, and then just hand the content to Facebook to monetize? But I don't think it actually solves these problems. It will not produce enough money for publishers to sustain the content ecosystem. It's great for Facebook. I think it's good, if not maybe in the long term for consumers, at least short term, it's good for consumers. But it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. It will not create a virtuous cycle. And I think a very good example of that was the Facebook apps platform. There were companies like Zynga that were early adopters and saw a huge amount of growth inside the Facebook ecosystem. But if you look at Zynga today, that is not an environment that's allowed them to sustain the kind of exponential growth that allows them to thrive and grow as a business. So Facebook is not going to solve this problem for us. Now, there's another major company that I think we might turn to solve this problem for us. And that's, of course, Google. Now, Google, as you may know, has a little bit of technology that sits between marketers and publishers that tries to make this ecosystem a little bit more efficient. Actually, they have a lot of technology that sits between marketers and publishers. Google has done an extraordinary job of finding ways to take little bits of every single ad transaction on the internet. I can name each of those. I think you can too. It's Google Analytics, it's DCM, it's DBM, it's AdX, it's GDN, it's DFP. They all have cool three-letter acronyms. And the nice thing about this for them is that they literally get a lot of every single ad transaction that happens. And I believe this is a big part of why publishers struggle to monetize. And I think it's also a big part of why marketers struggle to get excellent results, because Google's taking so much money out of the transaction that there's no room for anyone else to breathe. But thank goodness, that's the Borg of Google coming in. Google's introducing accelerated mobile pages. So now they can solve the consumer problem. All you have to do is take all other code off your pages and let Google serve everything from its proprietary domain. And now Google can take a piece of everything again. But it doesn't solve the fundamental problem. This does not create an open ecosystem where publishers get great monetization. In fact, I suspect that the publishers who are experimenting with AMP are not seeing their monetization increase. I suspect that the marketers who have spent the last 20 years developing measurement techniques and figuring out ways to make sure that they're getting great results aren't able to deploy them in this AMP environment. So what we're doing is we're throwing out the window 20 years of innovation in ad tech, and we're saying, hey, let's trust Google. I think in 10 years we'll look back and say, let's trust Google were the 3 most dangerous words ever spoken on the internet. So let's assume Google's not going to solve this problem for us. They'll certainly find ways to make money from this problem. So that really leaves us with who? Who can solve this problem? Who can restore the internet to the growth and glory that we expect from it? I think the answer is us. No one company outside those 2 can actually solve this problem. But I believe if we all collaborate, we can work together to solve this problem. It requires all of us to do a few things. To solve these problems, I'll propose a couple of solutions. First, we have to address the fundamental latency issues that are causing consumers to install ad blockers. Now, there's a few ways we can do this. One is we can just throw out a bunch of ad tech that we don't really need and a bunch of third-party widgets. That's good. But I believe we have fundamental technical challenges that are causing the way that web pages are rendered, the way that apps are built, to just not work. The bloat in apps, the number of SDKs we're installing, is causing a huge problem. You'll see later, Eric Hoffert will present some stats on how much mediation causes video latency. So when you go click on a video, you see this spinning circle. It turns out that spinning circle is not a brand advertiser. You know, I thought it was. If you see triangles in the sky, okay, that's a Doritos ad. But if you see a spinning circle on your browser, that's actually not an advertisement, that's latency. And there's no company that I know of called latency. So we got to get rid of that, because as a consumer, again, when I'm watching football on my browser, I really don't want to wait 20 seconds to see an ad and then have to watch a 30-second non-skippable commercial to only come back to my live sporting event 20 seconds late. A lot can happen in those 20 seconds. And as a consumer, I need this to be fixed. And I think we all would agree. But especially, the entire ecosystem benefits. Marketer engagement will increase. Publisher engagement, the number of bounces will decrease. Everything about the experience is better if we can address this fundamental latency problem. The same thing applies for apps. A couple months ago, AppNexus introduced Price Check, which is our header bidding solution for mobile. Allow me to digress and say that calling it header bidding in mobile drives me crazy. There's no header, but the masses have spoken. So we're calling it Price Check. All it does is, before you decide what ad to show, we make a call out and say, what's the best price out there in the ecosystem? And if that's a good price, take it. And we don't have to do any mediation. No daisy chaining, no layering of SDKs. It's the first real viable RTB solution that's actually transparent and decreases friction across the ecosystem. This is the kind of technology that will solve the fundamental latency issues that we're seeing in the mobile ecosystem. And of course, in desktop, we've seen header bidding dramatically reduce the daisy chaining that's caused significant page load delays. So these are all things that we can do together to reduce latency. And I believe it gives publishers the excuse they need to tell their consumers not to block ads. And it takes away the biggest excuse that consumers have for ad blocking. Now, the second thing we have to do is we have to compress the supply chain. We have a very complex supply chain in advertising. It's not just Google that has many hops and many little nibbles between the publisher and the marketer. There's so many ad tech companies and so many technologies layered together. Last September, AppNexus took the dramatic step of reducing the number of hops that we allow an impression to take through our platform. Instead of hopping through 4, 5, 6 ad networks between the publisher and the marketer, we put in place a rule that said networks can't resell other networks. And what we saw was that the number of actual impressions on the platform was reduced significantly because of all the hops. But the actual beginning of the hops, the publisher inventory, didn't change. We saw a huge increase in CPMs, 361%. We quadrupled CPMs for publishers. And in that process, we increased viewability, in other words, advertiser effectiveness, by 80% across the platform. It's a perfect example of how this virtuous cycle works. But we're not done. There are still many intermediaries, many pieces of this supply chain that we all need to work together to eliminate. If you're a publisher and you're mediating across many ad networks, you are contributing to this problem. I understand that there's short-term revenue there, but the more you do that, the more latency you introduce and the more friction you introduce. We need to move past that to a world where every marketer can trace every dollar directly to the publisher. This is good for all of us, unless you're an intermediary. And the third thing we need to do is to use data science to improve all of these things. I believe the highest purpose for data science is not a bunch of equations. You'll hear Catherine Williams, our chief data scientist, later. You'll hear Gabriel Weintraub, our new chief economist, later. We've got a bunch of smart people here to talk about all the technology and data science we can deploy. What we're really aiming for, though, is not equations. What we're aiming for is serendipity. We want the experience when a consumer visits an app or a site to be, wow, that's a cool ad. Or, how did they know I wanted that table? Not, my teeth are perfectly white, thank you, which happens all the time. Like, stop showing me those ads, they're fine. That, to me, is where we bring the data behind the scenes into the picture, to show consumers serendipitous ads that actually influence their behavior. That's what every marketer has tried to achieve for 50 years, is ways to connect with consumers at the right moment with the right message. And that's the exact thing that we're trying to do. And that also fuels this virtuous cycle. It allows us to get better results for marketers and better results for publishers and a better experience for consumers. None of that is format dependent. We can do that with video. We can do that with native. We can do that with traditional banner ads. Nothing stands between us and making all of this work. And I believe if we do these three simple things, if we work together, if we collaborate and innovate to make the internet better, we unlock the fundamental creativity, which is why we start with the Lucky Chops. Because music, if you think about it, is a bunch of technical complexity behind the scenes. There's all these things that these musicians do that isn't serendipitous. But the experience you all had when you walked in here thinking, oh my goodness, another ad tech conference, and heard this incredibly high-energy band, that is what we want to create across the internet. And I believe if we do this, we can save the internet, we can make it better, and we can help all of our businesses and everyone who's building businesses around us grow and thrive for another couple of decades. Thank you.